Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of The Trust. To all of you out there, we've got several channels going right now: the Social Media Pulse Facebook channels, Agora Pulse, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Let's go. So excited to have you guys here. We're going to get right into it. Just as a precursor, this show, in case you're wondering and you're watching, is designed to be a place to learn about how different people are executing community at their organization and be sort of a roadmap for executives, frontline people, regular community managers to use to either start a program or improve their program, or just get ideas as to why they should do a program, or to take somebody who's never thought about having a community program and catapulting them into somebody who is starting one. And we really want to explore the concept of trust in every episode. That's the name of the show. Obviously, it is The Trust. The concept is that community management, and this isn't a concept, this is true, community is built on trust. When users trust the environment and the people there, they tend to catch lightning in a bottle and create really useful communities, particularly communities of practice. So we want to explore not only that, how community managers build trust, the ways they do it, the venues they use to do it, and really kind of deep dive into what community means to them, because community isn't just one thing. And anybody who tries to put it in a box is kind of annoying, right? For those of us who work in the industry, we deal with that all the time, where it's like somebody's trying to put too fine a point on what community means, and it really isn't something that should be wrangled. And so that's what we're going to go over here. And I'm really very, very excited to be doing our first episode called Building Enterprise Community with Knowledge Management with none other than Laura Lerner. Welcome, Laura. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Laura, for those of you who don't know, is the head of knowledge management at Coupa Software. In an earlier life, she also hired me into my second community management job. So that's why she's been trapped here by me. She is a preferred member of my network. I don't know yet if I'm a preferred member of hers, but still, she's here. And has been building and working in community programs via knowledge management for quite some time. And those of us in the community game or in the sort of corporate education game, I think obviously they've heard the term knowledge management, are aware of it. But I want to dig into just what it is for those who don't necessarily understand. I know it's a real conceptual jabberwocky, I'm sure there, and how you got into it. And then just like the use cases that you, Laura, have worked through, are currently working through and gone through in the past. Quite specifically, obviously it's near and dear to my heart, the program that was built at ADP and the challenges that were overcome to get there. And in fact, two programs built, internal and external, there. But we don't need to jump right into that, because this isn't an ADP show.
Well, we can hit all of it. No worries.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, okay. So Laura, why don't you tell us about yourself and about knowledge management and how you got into it?
Sure. So I never do this succinctly, so I look forward to all the coaching that I will receive about this. But yeah, so I have been, I will classify myself as sort of a, CAIM practitioner for the last, nearly 20 years. And what that means, right? So let me start with CAIM, and then I'll sort of explain how I got to it. So the textbook definitions, I mean, there are there are a lot of different perspectives about it, right? But a lot of it tends to center on like the acquisition, creation, the sharing, the capturing, the transition, the transfer of knowledge overall, right? And that knowledge has been interpreted knowledge often gets interpreted as like document and content management, but really it's bigger than that. It's about what we can express, and also what's in our heads. So knowledge management is really about, I mean, it actually can't exist without community. Is really the big idea. Without networks of people to power knowledge management. So that's I tend to frame it when I'm talking to organizations about it, as making the most of what we know as an organization. But there are lots of different variations on that theme. So I'll pause there. Anything you need me to unpack before I go into the how I got here?
No, making the most of what we know. That's like bookmark that. We'll definitely turn that into a clip or something. Um,
Right.
but no, I so you talked about it's what's it's the documentation we have and it's what's in our heads. I think that's a cool concept, and I think that's one of the things that I saw you execute so well in years past. Can you explain that a little bit more? What you mean by that?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, just knowledge is gained through experience, right? I mean, we tend to in the corporate worlds, right? We tend to talk about it. We tend to talk about training, or we tend to talk about content management. Sort of very transactional activities. But really, knowledge each of us have is gained through experience. Our sensor, how we sense the world around us, how we interpret it, how we share it with, and reflect it back to other people, right? So it's without getting so esoteric on this guy, from a corporate perspective, right? It's about how do you cultivate the right behaviors so that you're always growing. As an organization, you're sensing conditions around you. You are continuing to evolve your knowledge, and for what you do know, with either your folks in house or the market that in which you're involved in, right? How do you use that knowledge again to everybody's best effect? I think I was answering your question, but if not, yeah, point me in the right direction.
No, absolutely. I love that. And I love that Dr. Ruth Inman chimed in here, our director of education, that knowledge management is her jam. And also hello to Josh and Shannon who are on the feed as well. No, I think that was wonderful. And I am very excited to continue talking about just how you've executed those things, because I think that like the concept of like sensing your environment and sort of knowing what then content you ought to react to it with is something that we all do, just in our own way. And that's why this show to me is really interesting, because everybody who's in community thinks that way. They probably don't think of knowledge management that way. And that's why it's really interesting to me. So yeah, let's jump into it. So in terms of how you got into it, you went to a no name college in New York City called Columbia. Columbia, is
Yeah.
that right?
Well,
Haven't heard
yeah,
of
but
it.
yeah, and I guess it really didn't even start there. I would say because yeah, I to use a knowledge management term, I codified my expertise with my master's in information knowledge strategy at Columbia, but it started well before that. I would say that my career in KM actually started like way back in the day, even when I was doing like trade shows and starting to like get my hands around like how we communicate to people and share a message, and how we plan projects, and how all the people that you have to get involved. And from there, right, it really became about like I became fascinated in the content part of the equation, which then evolved into me like actually having a stint as actually an editor and a managing editor for nonprofits, and then ultimately for technical documentation. And that, as you really start to get behind the scenes of the processes of how you bring uh, content to life, again, it's all about the network and the people and what they know, and how you activate all of that. And so when something goes wrong with the content, and getting into the root cause of all of that, which is like systems and quality, and again, who you've got plugged into the network, it actually just leads into knowledge management concepts. So I actually consider my first role, or sorry, my first KM role, actually starting at a little joint called Intuit, where I
Mm-hmm.
I started with the self-service portion of supporting their self-service experiences for QuickBooks and Quicken, and those folks as part of their small business org. So that uh, is where I actually then started cutting my teeth on all the systems ends of things. How we start connecting the dots between all of what like our support agents know versus what our product team thinks, and then sort of smushed in the middle are the people trying to capture ongoing changes, right, from like a formal knowledge perspective, and then again everything that is generating as product team learns more, as the support team learns more, and how you bring all of that together to actually help people accelerate what they know, and so forth. So Intuit I consider my first KM role, but from there it really just yeah, just spiraled. Got into communities. Actually, Intuit was my first brush with communities because we had a really great leader,
Hmm.
Scott Wilder, and folks leading communities for Intuit. But after that, it just sort of built upon itself. Doing some stints at a digital marketing agency where got even more into communities of practice and how you get teams of experts activating and aligning and solving some of the big problems that you face in an organization before coming to ADP. And again, I'm getting really long-winded with this stuff, but that was where then communities were really just starting to take off. A lot of energy and passion around there, but bringing this all together with, again, sort of activating a network so that we are constantly improving what we know, sharing what we know, and as a result making demonstrable business impact. That really has been my focus ever since. So um, again, I will pause there because I also, for the audience, right, I just really hate talking about myself. So
Yeah, she does. She doesn't like compliments, and though she gets probably more than anybody I've ever worked with, so it's really wasted on her.
it is. Don't do it.
Well, so I think what I want to get more into some of the other stuff there, and first of all, like from a community standpoint, when I was early in community before I got to ADP, um, everybody kind of knew about Intuit's community. They were kind of early adopters of that, and that's something I'd love to talk about. And also, I think maybe that played a role in ADP wanting you to come up with a competing program, perhaps just a smidgen, right? um,
Maybe.
but going back to your time before Columbia, and one of the things that you said there that I really liked was sort of bringing content to life, and that the only way that that happens is with people, right? Like, do you remember the first time kind of that you caught that like little lightning in a bottle and brought content to life?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think it's an everyday challenge, if I'm honest, right? The ideas that spark and and turn into something, good, right? So I think it's yeah, I don't know if I could pinpoint one time. I remember, like, at ADP, how excited we got the first time we had a customer answer another customer.
Yeah.
So, like, that one I think is a particular standout moment. I mean, I definitely can't take credit for anything at Intuit, right? It was it was good to see it, it, sort of in the wild, right? But yeah, I think it's more of those moments when we actually, you know, it's ADP that stands out in my memory, like, for those firsts,
Oh
I
yeah.
guess I would say. So
I don't know when I started using this term. It might have come from you, or it might have come from ADP or something, but it was like zero touch solutions. We called that when a customer
mhm,
answered another
mhm,
customer, and
yeah,
how exciting a zero touch solution was. Yeah, in
mhm,
those early days. And I remember in particular too, like that there would be like one or two users who would come in the late afternoon and like answer everyone's questions. And it was just the best feeling, like they just swept up for you. Um, well, so let's talk about, okay, so you're working it into it. You're starting to form this idea that you want to be a knowledge management practitioner as your vocation, and you lead into this master's program that you go into at Columbia. I've never met anybody with this particular master's degree other than you to this day, and I look out for it because I you're a mentor and hero of mine. And so I
oh
just
my
don't
gosh,
I
yeah,
don't see it out there. I don't see a lot of people. Like, I don't often see head of knowledge management titles out there as much as I felt like I did before. um so it's unique, and I think that's why people, I want to know more about, I want to hear you talk more about it, obviously. But yeah, what led you into that program?
yeah, well, so it was a lot of things, I guess. So one, trying to validate the right approaches that I could help do good in the organizations that I was working for, because I really see knowledge as being foundational to any organization, whether it's for profit, not, right. It really is the lifeblood of yeah, what an organization has to offer, right? Like it's either, advice or it's a product or whatever. And yeah, so I just feel like it's the lifeblood. And so yeah, it is really interesting because I actually have been noticing this lately as a trend that I see, and maybe my network is not well connected, but like the jobs that I see out there right now, like the highest level I see is it's very common to say director of KM, and then it's like do all of this globally, and so it begs the question, if it's this important to the organization, why is it sort of uh, I don't want to say buried under like customer experience or operations or wherever a lot of times it happens to be uh, sort of pigeonholed to support, right? Because to your question about education and sort of credentialing of KM, it's been very common to think of KM as very much support related, right? And methodologies that are specific to how you manage knowledge for the support end of a life cycle, of a product life cycle. So like knowledge centered support is all about how you're supposed to get agents to create documentation of some sort for every case they touch, and then it goes through a process, and there's kind of a KCS credential for just that, but sort of all up knowledge management programs, thinking about it strategically, thinking about it on behalf of an entire organization, right? How you think about using knowledge to a competitive advantage, and in all the other use cases like innovation and so forth, right? Like, I don't think that's as widespread. I know for Columbia's program in particular, it actually grew out of their data management credentialing first, and then it evolved as the world was starting to and the research was starting to corroborate what we were seeing with networks and just how they activate and how all of this all comes together. So Columbia took the step to evolve it, and I think a couple of other schools have followed suit. I want to say it's University of Kentucky also has a master's in this, but fact check me on that. Well, fact check me on that after it. But they also, I think, have a fairly robust program. And again, there's other organizations that do some certificate based things, but there's not a lot of formal like schooling, graduate or undergraduate that is about KM. It can be it's an elective, like a taught an elective at the
Yeah.
undergraduate level. Right. So anyway.
It's interesting too, because like I think community management is probably a little bit behind that. Like, I don't know that there's any community
Mm,
management programs at colleges at this stage. There possibly are elective
yeah.
courses. Dr. Inman could probably tell us. But it is interesting too, as somebody else who's committed to a field like that, where it's like, for so long in community management, you saw there was community manager, and there was maybe senior community manager, or what did
Right.
they call
Yep.
us at ADP? Online
Oh
community
yeah. Online community.
administrator
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And that was a blanket of like any number of people,
Yeah.
until they actually changed that. And no, I find it really interesting. And back to your point too about, I would find most executives hard pressed to say that getting the knowledge that's in the collective heads of their company out into the world shouldn't be one of your top priorities, like, or out of their head. um
Yeah.
I worked on kind of a super flawed knowledge based program, not at ADP, this wasn't your fault, um where we had a
Thank you,
community
Fit.
that was
Yeah.
fully based on knowledge base from engineers. And the idea was that as these engineers solved problems, they were supposed to write up a case every single
Yep.
time, except for they
Yep.
were on the phone all day, right? And
Mhm,
they didn't
mhm.
have the time to write these things up. And so they had these insane quotas to meet. And so they were there, and the quotas were just get it done. And so we ended up with all of this random knowledge base that was so confusing and so all
Yeah.
over the place. Um, and there was no planning around it, because literally I was running the program, and it really shouldn't have been me. And I'm not an engineer, nor are you in that case, but like somebody who really comes in with that specific expertise should be the one setting the standards for that kind of a program, because obviously the nobility of what we were attempting to do was great. We were trying to
Yeah,
get it
yeah,
out
yeah.
there into the world. We were trying to do what you do with any support community, which is to take that one-to-one conversation that's on the phone and the solutions that you achieve there and surface them out into the
Yep.
world. We just did a poor job of it. um, and so I think that, you know, that's I think something anybody can wrap their head around, and certainly then could wrap their head around the idea that you ought to have an executive of knowledge management for sure.
Yeah, I mean, KM is definitely filled with good intent. But yeah, there are a lot of common pitfalls, and yeah, but lots of learnings along the way. So
Yeah, I mean,
an
like,
executive, somebody who's been around the block, right, can absolutely help avoid some of those common tripping points, whatever.
well, and what do they talk about all the time? I don't have the exact stat here, but losing a person costs some ridiculous amount of
Yeah,
money and
yeah,
like intellectual property and institutional knowledge and things like that. And in an ideal state, right, in an ideal world where you have a robust knowledge management program, it would cost you far less to lose a person because their institutional knowledge would be out there in the world for mass consumption, whether that means internally or in an external community situation, or a place for all customers to consume.
yeah, yep.
And so anybody, I feel, could get behind that.
Yeah, and I think there's even, to that point, right? I mean, as we matured our program at ADP, we actually were able to connect the dots even to overall employee engagement. So not even just reducing the cost of, uh, attrition, but in some cases trying to avoid attrition entirely by making sure that employee engagement was sufficient in some of those key areas, like I can find what I'm can find the information I need to do my job, right? Things that are very simple like that, in terms of reducing static to making a living. So yeah, yep, I agree with you.
I remember, and I use this anecdote all the time when I'm talking about the community that we run for Agorapulse, called Social Media Pulse, or we run it for social media managers at Agorapulse. We want to, how do you get people coming back to your community? The best way I've seen it over time is to do things that help people get through their workday. And that's even kind of how I advertise myself on my LinkedIn, been
Mhm.
helping people get through their workday for 10 years. There's so many communities that might say like, okay, we're going to have a community that's all just like AMAs and have cool people in here and things like that. And those are great things to have in communities. But I find myself visiting communities the most when I'm looking for a job or something, doing something self-interested, right?
Yeah, yep.
And um, so if you can tap into people's self-interest, that is really powerful. And what's the most self-interested thing that people do professionally? It's to not look stupid at work. It's to look like you know what you're doing. And I remember being at some event for ADP where me and Janice were giving away cheap Samsung tablets or something for some contest. I think we were in
All right.
King of Prussia,
Mhm.
Pennsylvania, and a guy comes up to me and he says, you know, there's a thread in the community where someone asked a question and the first person answered it correctly and it was marked as a solution. And he's like, it probably doesn't seem that remarkable in your community. It has like one like. Um, I look at this thing all the time because it's something I'm supposed to know for my job. And I don't remember what it was. It was something about like tax codes or something really clinical and exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but the stuff we worked with back in those days. Um, but he said, it's something I forget all the time. And people ask me about it live on calls. And I have the bookmark in my bookmarks thing from the community. And I click it and I can in stride remind myself what to say. And I explain. And I then don't look stupid. And it's because of you guys. Thank you so much. And that was the best thing anybody ever said to me
That
as
is
a
awesome.
community manager was like,
That is awesome.
because don't we all have that, right? When people at work ask you something you know you're supposed to know, and if we can be the crutch that helps you seamlessly get through that situation, that's the dream, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
For sure. No, I think that's community is a really interesting confluence point between self-interest and generosity.
yeah.
So that you
That's a
actually
great
get
line.
really cultivate cultivate that trust, right? Like so yeah, you got to have a lot of conditions, right? We're actually starting up this conversation at Coupa right now, as well as we try to take a community that has been out in the wild for about 8 years, and we have I will say the the team had taken sort of a we build it and they will come, field of dreams sort of a approach,
Oh no.
and fast forward 7 years later when I showed up and I was like, hey, perhaps we should rethink this
Mayhaps we
model,
shall. Yeah.
because yeah, because it became a de facto like ideation community without any of the underlying supporting process and infrastructure to actually earn the trust of our community to do that. So actually, we're going through a little bit of a reinvigoration of community to try to earn back that trust. And yeah, anyway. Um,
No, I once had I once was the steward of a flawed ideation community myself, and at the same place where we had the bad knowledge base program, and we had people coming in with ideas all the time, and it was great. It was like ideas, 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 but it was like the Seinfeld episodes where it's like anybody can just take reservations. It's keeping the reservation that means something. Taking is super
yeah.
easy, and I had a standing meeting where I was supposed to go up like every Tuesday as the product team's team meeting ended and ambush them into responding to these ideation requests.
Oh
And
no.
they
Yeah.
basically would just laugh at me and be like, oh, Paul's back. Who's going to dodge
Mhm.
me? And like people would run for the coffee machines and things like that. Um, and it was 100% like they had started the ideation thing, patted themselves on the back, and then let it sit there for 2 years and didn't execute on it. And you're saying that not only did they do that, but they let it sit for 7.5 years in that case?
I mean, it's yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we're trying, yeah, we're in the throes of because our first step. So one of the folks watching said, yeah, you have to be intentional with community building. I mean, one of the first exercises we went through was actually to make sure we were clear as a business what purpose we thought community could have as an organization, because yeah, like just being deluged with ideas that we were either not going to go with for some reason or not communicate for some other
Yeah.
set of reasons, right? Like maybe that purpose isn't serving us the way or our customers the way we think it should. So and I think that's something we did really well at ADP in particular, both with the bridge and our internal community as well, right? About being very, very purpose driven, which I think is, again, one of those other, you know, self-interest, generosity, purpose, right? Like sorts of things that come together to instill, yeah, that trust. So anyway, not to
Well,
shoehorn trust in there, but yeah, that's.
let's circle back around to that because we're
Mm,
getting to it took us 30 minutes, but we're going to talk about trust.
oh
No.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
let's circle back around. You're fresh faced coming out of Columbia, just living in the city, and you're did you go immediately to ADP? It was like one job in the middle there?
No, no, no. So I actually started the program while I was at a joint called Sapient. I think they're published
Yeah.
at Sapient now, but anyway, yeah, I was at ADP when I graduated. It was a remote hybrid program. So yeah, didn't school did not stop the need to earn a living, or all the experiential learning that I was doing at the same time. We'll say it that way.
Well, yeah. So that's kind of the thing. That's what I want to get to here. And so this gets
Mhm.
into the real sort of meat of the episode, which is how you take what you've been talking about, knowledge base, to a program, or sorry, knowledge management, to a program that is based on the actual content, the community that builds around it. You're building it from scratch, and where you go from there. Also, how that process sort of done well ensures that you get the trust of your audience. I think I'd love to just sort of dig into that from there. Like, what's day one like when you're going to build? I think you started with external, right?
Yep, yep.
And then a
Started
year
with
later
external.
went to the internal. Can you just run us through
Yeah.
how you approach that?
For sure. So, I mean, when I walked in the door at ADP, I will say that some of the heavy lift was already done in terms of like we had an executive who was already very excited about the possibility of community. And this executive, one, he was, an SVP, and he had a reputation for getting things done already. So I already had like that sort of in my camp, which honestly is really critically important for community and other KM-esque programs, I will say. So, what so then the convincing was really around like the business units that we needed to help support all of this. So yes, we started in a very specific slice of the business. It happened to be our tax business at the time, which is where this SVP sat, and we worked on just very specific use cases for those particular customers. Um, and so in doing that, right, the team was a little smaller and already on board because yes, boss. But then when the team started to understand that okay, tax knowledge and this experience in a vacuum may not provide all of the value that we want to provide, and of course we've got some pressures for easing the pressure on our contact centers, right? you know, do we need to look at we do need to look at bringing some of our big business units, particularly in our small to mid market segments, on board with us. And so the how to that piece was really around co-creation, and so we literally got these senior executives in a room. I want to say, I think it was 2 days. It was a 2 day session. One, just to help them understand community in the first place, like what it is, what it means, that sort of thing. And it was also kind of concepts around collaboration, speaking about generosity and people helping each other, things like that I think are all what community professionals live and breathe, right? And then after setting that foundation, like day one with a set of exercises and discussion and reflection and all that kind of stuff, then day two was really about like, okay, so knowing all of that, how do we think a community might be applied to your business, and what sorts of purposes do we think would be valuable to the customers, the clients, from ADP speak, that you serve. And so we spent a working session developing, prioritizing those purpose statements, and doing some action planning where we walked out of the room where they had tapped key people in their organizations as SMEs, people who could be moderators. Like that's how action oriented we got at the end of that day, and that's where we got sort of our rollout plan, uh, and we're very mindful of sort of trickling out community before it really hit home that critical mass is a really important ingredient for brand new communities. And then I'm blanking now, but like the other pieces of then actually seeding and making sure that we are appropriately supporting the community as it starts to take shape and smell like a place that people need to be. So anyway, did I answer the question? I
Oh,
think I got there
absolutely.
eventually.
And just like the intentful way of going about getting executive buy-in,
Oh, for sure.
a couple of concepts that you talked about there, because um, first of all, I want to know about how that first batch of executives actually took to that 2 day session, right? Like, well, because anybody who's been in community management, even at companies that have programs, like you have your job because they've
Mhm.
created a program, have run into issues with executives pushing back on why the program exists, or why it needs more money, or why it should continue. Um, how did that go when you approached it? Because it sounds like you kind of had maybe an idea that it might be a difficult thing, and were very intentful about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one, I mean, we definitely wanted to avoid, I mean, we came armed with like references and
Yeah.
research from Gartner, right? Like all of that typical, get execs on board sort of thing. Um, and so it was a lot of just open discussion, because that's where we started hearing their concerns about, well, what happens if somebody says something negative about us, which
Oh my God.
is a concern that I've heard across organizations. So this is not specific, definitely heard it at ADP, have heard it other places since then, right? And so then it helped us uncover, potential objections and headwind like really early on, so that we could commit to things like, hey, okay, well then, if we're a little concerned about, some negative, um, negative comments or something like that, right? We will, take action to ensure, this moderation functionality is on. We will do small incremental rollouts, and your folks can check in, with these folks, right? And then, and we can take pulses with customer advisory boards, things like that, data points that we would be able to then circle back to say, hey, you had this concern. We, took an approach to help mitigate that. And here's what we're seeing at the end. Because we, it wasn't just that 2 day that kind of gave us the license to go forward. But then it was like continuously engaging to say, here's what we've learned. So here's what we're going to do about the roadmap, and from there. And I will say that we had uh like one of the periphery, pretty quickly latch. I won't say, maybe quickly is not the right word, but was one of the more early adopters in that group of execs. And so he started then helping bring his peers along, particularly when we're like, we don't really have enough data to work with because there are not enough people in the community, right? So would you guys be willing, we watch the contact volumes, right? And if they don't change, right, can we open the doors wider? And so eventually, like, because we were using sort of a data based approach to this, and we had escalation paths, we had their people on the ground, side by side with us. They gave us the green light, and things took off from there.
So I remember vividly, first of all, the executive who was the champion of the program, Joe, and what we knew at all times is that we had what we called air cover from him.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really important concept. It's something I think about anytime I move to a new program at Agora Pulse. I did like 6 hours of interviews with our CEO, Emmerich, and knew that he was as bought in. If he seemed to be more bought into the concept than I was. Sometimes he seems more enthusiastic than me. And so having that level of air cover is just such a great way to sleep at night. And in your case here, when you're there, you've got executives at a 2-day session, probably there like in Roseland or something, and
Yeah,
you've got them there with the
exactly.
box
Yep.
lunches and everything. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they're not there if you don't have air cover, because at the end of the day, they probably don't want to be there, but you're introducing them to these concepts because you've had the right sponsor. You started with the right sponsor. And that goes to, from an educational perspective, to anybody who wants to start a program, know that you ought to have that. And then from the other side, if you're an executive who wants to start a program, know that you need to be that for the people that
Yeah,
are going to
for
be in
sure.
the trenches there. Yeah, it's
For
a
sure. Yep.
killer. So from there, you've got the buy-in, you've done the boot camp, you've gotten people to understand. And now, I know as much as anyone, you could teach people about community 100 times and they still might come back to you with the same question a year later, right? Where did you, so, and I'm sure some of these executives, this is before I was at ADP, I'm sure we're asking me the same questions a year later. But
Oh
where did
yeah,
you go?
undoubtedly.
Where did you go from there? And we're sitting right now, we're at like late 2012, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it's really important to point out. I mean, I think the early investment in a community manager was critical, right? Like it was the first hire after my own hire at ADP, and I
We're
think
talking about me.
well,
Yeah.
we actually
Oh,
uh,
right.
we
That's
made a
right.
hire initially that brought an angle to the community that I think was a little advanced for where we were. Right, we really needed um, we brought somebody on board who was really interested in sort of the tools and the data behind community, which is a huge strength and awesome, right? But where we were at the time was really needing somebody to connect people, which is the strength that you brought to the table, and really what helped us, again, drive all of that explosive growth, right? Because without somebody in there who is facilitating those connections, fostering the conversation, right? Because a lot of times in terms of the change that you're having to drive internally is that, we're not looking to publish content, right? We're looking to facilitate conversation and to have programs that are driving engagement, looking to establish those connections to build that trust, right? The opportunity for the self-interest and the generosity, right? Like that's really what was at stake, and that's the strength that you were able to bring to us, and truthfully, between you and Janice, began coming to us as a collaboration programs manager at the time, right? With all the focus that we had and the successes that we were seeing within community, because it took us what it take us like 6 to 9 months to be able to then see an impact to both our that our really engaged people were starting to contact us less, so we started to prove that business case, and we were also starting to see a slight upward tick in sentiment for those folks as well about ADP overall. So as we were proving out some of those business cases, I mean that's really what then brought us the I'll call it the social capital within ADP, then to start experimenting with internal communities, so that we could uh, essentially do the same thing for our customer service teams to start out with, right? So um, yeah, that was kind of the the add-on part of that story, right? We had to keep the momentum going there, but then there was such energy and it was working so well for customers. Why wouldn't we do that internally as well? And so that's
Yeah.
when the experiments with internal communities began. Because yeah, anyway, because we also had some initial pilots at ADP that our team wasn't involved in, but that we eventually got the opportunity to support and help, yeah, usher in a new approach. So
Well, I for one was grateful that you needed a less advanced community manager.
I did not say
Yeah.
that.
um, no, it was those were really fun times, and learned so much about this stuff, and so from a standpoint of where things were in those days, um, talk about like the knowledge management strategy that went into just like the actual content piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that because we didn't get so codified there, and I think the community ended up being the influencer to what the knowledge management strategy became. So I will say that we community allowed us to understand what our gaps were, because there absolutely was sort of the traditional knowledge base that was sitting in a separate repository, and there was a small team who was always laboring under a backlog of changes that needed to happen with the content, right? But the community allowed us to get the right telemetry to understand what we should prioritize and what we shouldn't. So that was one of the impacts to a, kind of a what we would call a traditional, or I call it a traditional KM sort of process. So that actually changed their roles and their lives quite a bit by starting to connect those dots, and similarly, with some of the use cases that we were seeing with the internal knowledge sharing, we actually did start to shift away from the KMS and move our agents even into just internal communities, so they could ask their question. If the answer was already there, awesome, great. But then other agents were there to help them and quickly answer their questions so they could get back to work. So yeah, we actually ended up shifting that quite a bit. Again, more of a traditional KM sort of use case, but that was sort of the next iteration, because as that started then helping us to understand what knowledge was actually critical, because we were also missing some of that insight from our CRM, like what topics were popping to the top and things like that. We weren't able to get that from in a programmatic way from our CRM. Community helped us understand what those topics were, so then we could start to understand what do we actually need to formally manage and share more consistently across our touch points, And so then we were actually able to start harvesting knowledge from the community, get it into a content management system that then our documentation teams or folks who are, sort of tasked with formalized management of content could then get that into a system that then allowed us to, just eventually distribute where the content needed to go. So um, we went community up versus versus in parallel, or the other, content out. I don't know. Anyway, like we went
No,
community based first.
the name of the episode should be "Building Knowledge Management with Community." Then maybe we just turn it around.
Yeah, for the ADP
Yeah,
instance,
for that
absolutely,
piece of it.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's something that I talk about all the time. Is that when you're selling internally, the need for a community, its ability to identify gaps in what your audience needs, I think, is something that gets
Mhm.
underrated. Um, Although I want to talk about the social capital that you earned internally in that case, because from a standpoint of support communities, this thing is something that I got from you that I seldom see anybody else doing support communities use, which is the equation: cost of a call times
Mhm.
views of solutions times 0.1. And what that is almost every organization that takes a lot of support calls has done the research to put the cost of what taking a call incurs for the company.
Yep, yep.
In the community, there are solutions, right? Whether that is a knowledge base article or just a question that has been marked as solved. In the case, in our use case, we didn't even bother with the knowledge base articles in terms of tracking. It was all the question and answer,
Yeah.
and those that were marked as answered. And so if you're not familiar with a traditional community platform, typically when there's a question and answer thread, somebody can mark the solution that they achieved, and then that'll show up in the original post. And so Laura had taken this equation from like an Oracle study
Oracle.
that
Yep,
I
yep, yep.
have downloaded, but you can't find it online anymore. It was from like 2012. I
Mhm.
have it on my iCloud somewhere because it's awesome. But yeah, it's a really simple thing. It's saying the cost of a call times views of solutions times 0.1, because the Oracle research had said typically between 1 and 3 out of 10 people achieve a solution based on what they found in the community. So we went with the low end just so that nobody would challenge us on using the high end. So we said, okay, let's assume 10% of people, when they view a solution, do not call ADP in the course. For ADP, what was it, like 30,000 support employees or something? It was like almost half of their employees. I
Large.
probably have that
Yeah.
wrong, but a lot of support calls. And the thing that we would field in the community all the time, particularly in the early days before we had solved some of these problems for them, was I called ADP and sat on the hold for an hour and a half, right? And so again, like I'll put this equation in the show notes or something on social media posts. But after, I don't know, a year or so, we were talking about deflections that were in the 6, 7, 800,000 per month category. And that's with one full-time person, me, on the community there. And then, other people on the team doing other things and helping with internal and whatnot. But by the end of it, when there were 20 something full-time people in the community, in the external community, the deflection was in the millions of dollars per month. And really remarkable case in point for anybody who has a support team that maybe is constantly chasing the hiring dragon, which is
Yep, yep.
everyone. And I've never run into a support team who is like, we're doing great, we have the exact number of people we need. No, they're always chasing the hiring dragon. And so I think that also there can tend to be a sense amongst support teams when you're building a support community that you're trying to like take their jobs or something. And you're just trying to keep them comfortable. So you don't always feel understaffed and overwhelmed. A support community is a great tool for achieving that. And yeah, that equation ought to be ubiquitous. In fact, when I worked at Higher Logic, I tried to get them to build it into the product.
Awesome.
Unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, so we magically are 50 minutes into this awesome conversation. I'm having an amazing time, and we've talked so much about ADP. People who watch this might think we work there, but
True, it's
we
true.
both, when we left it around the same time,
Mhm.
5-ish years ago. And I want to dig into, in the last portion of the show, how you've been using knowledge management, like you mentioned, like flipping it the other way around to
Yeah,
build
yeah.
community since then.
Yeah, so I mean, um, I will say so. Since ADP, I've been at AWS, and now I'm at Coupa, and I will say that AWS was more focused on, I will call, traditional KM. So I'm gonna push them off to the side a little bit. But I would say at Coupa, I mean, I think from a KM perspective, one, I've got a really, similar to Joe, right? Like, I've got a really highly invested and energetic executive sponsor. He's actually at the C level, and so that has been fantastic. So it's enabled me to build a team. My very first hire actually was a community manager, because of what I said before, right? And really us needing to take a step back and make sure that we're being very purposeful and intentional with how we choose to leverage community at the organization. So I would say, from that perspective, I mean, the approach, pretty typical CAM approach to kind of get in, kind of see where the centers of knowledge are, what the touch points are, what our big challenges as an organization look like, and understand really where knowledge can help, or where we're maybe not scaling knowledge appropriately. Which, this is, it's been a long time since I've worked for a business sort of in this mid-market versus very large enterprise space. So KM is critically important, a critical part of the equation to help them actually scale. Because there's a lot of, there are people, experts here, that really need to amplify what they know. And so, KM gives a framework to sort of assess where things are, what is critical, who's involved, what does that network look like, and then design the right interventions, community being one of those, to help activate the organization and its kind of overall ecosystem to move things forward. So yeah, community is absolutely like one of those, but we also have self-service portals and a lot of internal knowledge sharing opportunities as well, because we actually, while I will say our intranet is socially enabled, and we have instant messaging available there, and wiki, right? That is not the same as community. And so right now I'm like in the process of trying to figure out how best to explain to this organization, and yeah, a better package all of that story to be able to, yeah, support all the things that, again, lots of good intention, lots of early execution, all this stuff, and so trying to then, you know um I think somebody and I talked about it as like, okay, like, we've got a bunch of, get a bunch of newly licensed drivers in Lamborghinis, but maybe like we need to,
Yeah.
actually get them into the Nissan Sentra initially, till we get our seal, get some more road time under us, and then move on. But anyhow, yeah, it's again, not sure I'm totally answering the question. It's lots of different moving pieces right now.
No, there's a lot to unpack there, including wading into the controversial waters of, is Slack community? And to anybody who's wondering,
Yeah,
the answer is no. um,
yeah.
and, and I don't mean that people can't build meaningful online environments in Slack. You absolutely can network and chat and share things. But from a knowledge management perspective, it would make Laura run out of the room. And so that's the issue. Is, we're talking so much about how knowledge management builds community, and when I think there are people who would be very defensive about whether their Slack group is a community. And like I said at the beginning of the show, community is however you define it. But from a standpoint of a place where you can, in an organized way, learn something and access content from the past and use a taxonomy to get there quickly.
Yeah.
I think all of us have had a situation where we're using Slack and you can't, like, where was that conversation? What channel was it in? When did they
Yeah.
say it? Was it there? And then you search and it's like, it doesn't come up and everything like that. And so it's not to say that Slack can't be quote unquote community, but from a standpoint of a community of practice and knowledge base, you might well go with an
Yeah.
actual platform. And
Yeah, no, I
yeah,
think it does great for, transactional exchanges, right? But in terms of amplifying the impact of that exchange, I think that's an area of opportunity for for that particular product. So yeah, and I think it's a very subtle type of understanding, especially for an organization where, oh, I've got this channel with blah 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 blah. So anyway, yeah, did not mean to divert our conversation there, but yeah, that's part of the educational challenge that I'm one of them that I am working with today. But
that's not a diversion. That's on topic for this episode. Building community with knowledge management. There's no knowledge management element to, at least as it stands, to Slack. There's a lot of cool interactive, like bells and whistles, and I use Slack to great effect
yeah, yeah,
in my workday. But from the standpoint of community, I think a lot of people they get psyched by the fact that they can start it for free. But therein lies the original problem, that you get 10,000 messages and then everything's gone if you started
hmm
it for free.
hmm
And what were we talking about? I think before the show, like just in our cross chat, the true value of community is in asynchronous consumption, which I ironically say while on a live show.
right. You're
That
here.
when somebody 5 years from now finds that thing, or when that guy we were talking about before hits his bookmark 5 years later to an evergreen piece of content that is still the answer that person needs, that's the beauty of it. And that goes even back to the equation as well. If I used to talk about how people get so obsessed on the person who asks the question and whether or not they get an answer. And obviously it's key for that person to get that answer. But what I always used to say is, I actually don't even care if that person comes back and gets the answer. If one of our moderators marks it as the correct answer because they know it to be the correct answer, and 1,000 people over the next 5 years view that, it solved 1,000 problems. And
That's
maybe
right.
not the one of the person who asked it, doesn't matter, because that's a zero touch solution right there, bringing it
Yep.
full
Yep.
circle.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, so anything about what you're doing right now that you'd love to share with the world at large that we haven't already?
Oh, I mean, it's really a work in progress. I mean, we've spent a lot of time, again, from trying to really understand the current state of our community. And I think even initially we sort of underestimated some of the ground, the trust that we had lost with the community. And we only recently uncovered sort of a lens on the data that, really brings it in stark relief. So we are looking at ways to remediate and to regain that trust. And as we are starting to, and we're starting to turn our attention to then, okay, so like, how do we need to adapt our engagement strategy and essentially, um, yeah, make it worthwhile. I don't want to say worthwhile because it definitely is worthwhile as it is today, but make it someplace that it can be seen as its own thing, right? Like it actually does not have a unique identity at Coupa today. So that's also one of the things that we are working on is because community as a concept at Coupa specifically is really a key a key portion of their value proposition, and it's even embedded in the product. So like, I mean, there's all kinds of maturity steps from an online community perspective that we just like totally jumped over. And so and so again, that Lamborghini where we sort of, need to, spend some time on the track first before we take it out on the open road. So trying to drive the car back to the track so that we can do that a little bit, and that includes even disambiguating, because Coupa even just uses the word community in all the places, what online community is, what that identity is, what that should mean to them, how they can have, so we can cultivate a sense of tribalism even within the community and folks there today. So those are kind of the big areas that we are working on right now, at least from the community lens. So.
Well, that's and that puts a nice puts a nice bow on things. I think that it's interesting to consider building trust where it has sort of gone away, right? Like, and so I've worked with communities where that lost trust, and that my job was to bring it back, and I found that harder than building it from nothing. Is that your experience?
It seems like it's going to be, because yeah, I mean, not only do we have behaviors with the community that we don't have a precedent to set, right? Like it really is an internal challenge first, at this point. And so, yeah, there seem to be a lot more headwinds, because of it, right? Because there's the age old KM challenge of this is the way we've always done it, right? So there's a lot of headwinds from that perspective. Not that everybody doesn't want to do the right thing, right? But yeah, I would absolutely say, talk to me again in a year. I'll have some some stories and
Yeah,
learnings to
let's
share.
do
But
it.
it does seem
Let's book
it
it.
does seem much harder. Yeah.
1 year from today,
There you go.
episode 53. No, we're
I
doing
hope
this once a
so.
month.
Yeah.
Episode
Yeah.
13. I can't do a show every week. Not enough people want to be on it. But that leads me to thank you so much for Laura, for being on it. Follow Laura on LinkedIn. Right there, you can see on the ticker. She has a Twitter account as well that is at Laura Lerner. I think I saw your last tweet was from before COVID.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really terrible at it, but if somebody pings me, I will respond. I'm just super
Absolutely.
slow.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the point of the show is we really want to hear from people about what they're doing to implement online community, or whether they're curious about it. The success of the show will depend on testimonials as to whether what we've said on it actually influenced you to start, improve, grow a community program, either from the executive level or from the bottom up. And we want to hear those stories, and we want to know what you want to hear about here too. So thank you to everybody who chimed in. Thank you to everybody who commented. I think in certain cases we were mentioning what people said, but not who they were, because for some reason on StreamYard right now, it just says LinkedIn user on half of them. So we'll have to sort that out for the next one. But thank you to Laura Lerner from Coupa Software, head of knowledge management, the second person to hire me into a community management job, and the best opportunity that I got that helped me catapult into whatever the hell I am today. And
it's a network, man. It's a network effect.
Yeah.
All good. It takes a team.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All
Yeah,
right.
appreciate the
Okay.
opportunity.
Agorapulse.com. Thank you to Agorapulse for putting together the show and the venue and everything like that. This is the Trust. We'll be doing this the second Wednesday of every month going forward. And there'll be a complimentary community within Social Media Pulse. So you'll check that out. And that's the other thing about the Trust is we're talking about trust. We're building a trust of community builders. You see what I did there? And Laura, right now it's just you and me. So we're the Trust.
I'll be there, and I'll point some other folks too. So yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity,
Okay.
and look forward to connecting with everybody.
Awesome. Thanks to you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.